Some of these games didn't just beat you, they waited until you were deep in, until you had already invested a Friday night and half a Saturday, and then they pulled the rug out from under you, threw you back to the beginning, and dared you to try again. We're talking about the Nintendo 64, the console that sat under your TV in the late 90s and absolutely wrecked you. Not in the way your older brother wrecked you at Street Fighter, in the way that made you question whether you were actually any good at video games at all. These aren't games that just aged poorly. These weren't games that feel hard by today's standards because we've all gone soft. These were brutal, unforgiving, and in some cases borderline sadistic the moment you hit power. This is the 10 Nintendo 64 games designed to make you quit. If you grew up with an N64 and you've still got the emotional scars to prove it, hit that subscribe button right now, because this channel was built for you. Drop a comment below and tell us which one of these games broke you first. We genuinely want to know. Let's set the scene before we get into it, because context matters here. It's 1997, maybe 1998. You've got a CRT television in your bedroom, or in the living room if your parents were feeling generous. The N64 controller is in your hands, that weird three-pronged thing that nobody ever quite figured out how to hold correctly. There's no internet to look up a walkthrough. There's no YouTube video showing you the exact pattern for the boss you've been stuck on for 3 days. There's no Reddit thread where someone already figured it out. It was just you, the controller, and the game. And either you figured it out or you didn't. And a lot of us didn't. The N64 era gave us some of the greatest games ever made. Super Mario 64, The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, GoldenEye, Banjo-Kazooie. Games that defined a generation and still hold up today. But for every masterpiece, there were games lurking on those store shelves that were designed, whether intentionally or not, to destroy you. These are those games, ranked from the ones that merely frustrated you all the way up to the one that we believe is the single hardest game on the entire platform. And we want you to stick around until the end, because number one is going to start some arguments. We're counting on it. Let's get into it. Number 10, Body Harvest, 1998. We're starting here because Body Harvest doesn't get nearly enough credit for how quietly, persistently miserable it was to play. On the surface, it looked like a dream. You're a soldier dropped into massive open-world environments, fighting off an alien invasion across different time periods. World War II Europe, 1990s America, ancient Greece. The concept was genuinely ambitious. This was an open-world game before open-world games were a thing, developed by DMA Design, the same studio that would eventually give the world Grand Theft Auto. So why is it on this list? Because ambition and execution are two very different things, and Body Harvest had a gap between them wide enough to drive a tank through. The learning curve wasn't steep, it was a cliff. The game dropped you into these enormous environments with almost no guidance and expected you to figure out what you were doing through pure trial and error. The mechanics were clunky in ways that went beyond the limitations of the hardware. The save points were so rare that losing progress didn't just sting, it genuinely set you back in ways that made you reconsider whether you wanted to keep going. And the enemies. The enemies scaled aggressively. You'd think you were making progress, getting a feel for the game, and then the difficulty would spike in a way that felt less like a challenge and more like the game was personally offended that you were still playing. Most people who rented Body Harvest from Blockbuster on a Friday night returned it Sunday afternoon, having barely made a dent. Not because they weren't good enough, because the game made it nearly impossible to build any momentum. It's number 10 on this list because compared to what's coming, it's almost gentle. But make no mistake, Body Harvest belongs here. Number 9, Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, 1999. Indiana Jones, the man with the whip and the hat, one of the coolest characters in the history of American pop culture. A guy who punched Nazis, outran boulders, and made archaeology look like the most exciting job on the planet. He deserved better than this. Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine was a third-person action adventure that tried to capture the spirit of the films and landed somewhere in the neighborhood of deeply frustrating. The concept was solid enough. You're indie. You're exploring ancient ruins. You're solving puzzles. You're fighting bad guys. That should work. That should be fun. It wasn't. The controls were imprecise in a way that made every platforming section feel like a negotiation rather than a game. You'd line up a jump, commit to it, and then watch Indy sail in a direction that had nothing to do with where you were pointing. The camera worked against you constantly, hiding threats and obscuring ledges at the exact moments you needed to see them most. The enemy encounters hit hard and hit fast, and the puzzle design offered almost no guidance. You'd wander through a level for 20 minutes, completely convinced you'd missed something obvious, only to discover the solution was hidden behind a piece of geometry that the camera refused to show you. And here's the thing about Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine that really gets you. It wasn't broken in the way that some games on this list are broken. It was just relentlessly, exhaustingly difficult in ways that felt arbitrary. Like the developers made deliberate choices to make your life harder at every turn. Indy survived the Ark of the Covenant. He survived the Temple of Doom. He did not survive the N64 camera system. Number 8. Doom 64, 1997. Before you come at us in the comments, hear us out. We know Doom is Doom. We know the franchise has always been about running fast, shooting everything, and not stopping to think too hard. And we know that a lot of you have fond memories of Doom 64 and would defend it until your last breath. But here's the thing, Doom 64 was not a port. It was not the same game you played on PC, with a slightly worse frame rate. Doom 64 was built from the ground up specifically for the N64, and the people who built it made some very deliberate choices about difficulty that separated it from everything that came before. The enemy placement in Doom 64 is surgical. Enemies are positioned specifically to punish you for doing the logical thing. You clear a room, you move forward, and something hits you from an angle you didn't expect because the level was designed to make you feel like you're never fully safe. The darkness, and we mean that literally, the game is visually dark in ways that make navigation genuinely difficult, adds a layer of tension that the original Doom never had. The puzzles are cryptic in a way that would make you pull your hair out without a guide. The later levels introduce enemy combinations that require actual strategy, not just reflexes. In the final stretch of the game, the endgame content is some of the most demanding material on the entire platform. Doom 64 is a masterpiece. Nobody is disputing that. But it is also a game that will humble you in ways you did not see coming. And if you think it belongs lower on this list, drop it in the comments. We want to hear the argument. Number 7. Castlevania 64, 1999. Castlevania has always been hard. That's part of the deal. You know what you're signing up for when you pick up a Castlevania game. Brutal platforming, punishing enemies, bosses that require memorized patterns and precise execution. The series built its reputation on making you earn every inch of progress. But Castlevania 64 took that tradition and added a layer of cruelty that was uniquely its own. The controls are the first thing that gets you. This was Konami's first attempt at bringing the franchise into 3 dimensions, and the transition was not smooth. Your character moves with a stiffness that makes every platforming section feel like you're fighting the controller as much as the game. And unlike the classic 2D entries, where the camera was never an issue, Castlevania 64 gave you a camera that seemed to have its own agenda, one that was rarely aligned with yours. The platforming sections are where this game truly earns its spot on this list. Crumbling platforms over bottomless pits. Precise jumps with a character who doesn't move the way you expect. Sections where a single mistimed input sends you all the way back to a checkpoint that feels like it was placed by someone who genuinely did not want you to succeed. The boss fights are no joke either. They demand pattern recognition and precise execution, and they do not forgive mistakes. The Grim Reaper encounter, the Tower of Execution, the final confrontation with Dracula himself. These are fights that will end your run over and over again until you've memorized every movement, every attack, every window of opportunity. Castlevania 64 is a game that made grown men put down the controller and walk away, not in anger, in quiet, defeated resignation, and that's almost worse. Number 6. Turok 2: Seeds of Evil, 1998. The original Turok was a landmark game, one of the first true first-person shooters on a console. It proved that the genre could work outside of a PC. It was ambitious, it was impressive, and it was hard enough to keep you busy for a while. And then Turok 2 came along and said, hold on, you think that was hard? Turok 2. Seeds of Evil is a game of epic scale and epic frustration. The levels are massive. We mean genuinely, almost incomprehensibly massive. Sprawling environments with multiple objectives, hidden pathways, and enemies that respawn with a frequency that starts to feel personal. You'd clear a section, move forward, backtrack for an objective you missed, and find the whole thing populated again, like you'd never been there. The boss fights in Turok 2 are their own category of punishment. The Primogeon, the game's final boss, has become something of a legend in N64 circles, and not in a good way. Getting to him requires surviving some of the most demanding content on the platform, and then you have to actually fight him. But here's what really puts Turok 2 on this list. The level design is so complex, so deliberately labyrinthine, that getting lost wasn't a possibility. It was a guarantee. You would spend an hour in a single level, convinced you'd covered every inch of it, and then discover an entire section you'd somehow missed. The game offered almost no guidance, no map worth trusting, and no mercy for players who didn't have the patience to methodically work through every corner of every environment. Turok 2 is a game that rewarded obsession. If you were the kind of kid who could spend an entire weekend on a single level, you eventually got through it. If you weren't, you didn't. Number 5. Conker's Bad Fur Day, 2001. Here's one that's going to surprise some people. And if it does, that tells us you either never played it or you only remember the parts that made you laugh. Because Conker's Bad Fur Day is one of the funniest games ever made. The humor is sharp, the writing is genuinely clever, and the whole thing has a personality that no other N64 game could touch. Rare was at the absolute peak of their powers when they made this, and it shows in every frame. But underneath all of that humor, underneath the singing poop monster and the movie parodies and the R-rated jokes, there is a platformer that will absolutely punish you if you're not paying attention. The Barn of Doom Wine Tunnel section. If you know, you know. You're trying to navigate a series of platforms while a massive fan generates wind that pushes you off course. The timing required is precise. The margin for error is almost non-existent, and the game offers you no sympathy when you fall, which you will, repeatedly, until you've memorized the exact rhythm of every gust. The Great Mighty Pooh boss fight is hilarious the first time. It is significantly less hilarious the fourth time you've died to it because you couldn't quite nail the timing on the corn dodging while circling and aiming simultaneously. And the later sections of the game, particularly the multiplayer adjacent content and the final stretch, demand a level of precision that the game's comedic tone does absolutely nothing to prepare you for. Conker's Bad Fur Day is a masterpiece. It is also a game that will make you feel genuinely stupid at regular intervals. Both of those things are completely true. Number 4. Sin and Punishment, 2000. This one requires a little context for the American audience, because most of you never got the chance to play it back in the day. Sin and Punishment was released in Japan in December of 2000 and never made it to North American store shelves during the N64's commercial life. It was developed by Treasure, one of the most respected game developers in the industry, and it is a rail shooter of almost incomprehensible intensity. You're moving through environments automatically, and your job is to aim, shoot, dodge, and survive. Simple enough on paper. Absolutely brutal in practice. The enemy patterns in Sin and Punishment are relentless. You're not just dodging bullets coming from one direction. You're managing threats from multiple angles simultaneously, switching between lock-on targeting and free aiming on the fly, while the game throws more and more at you with each passing minute. On easy mode, it's manageable. On normal, it demands real practice and real pattern recognition. On hard, it is a different game entirely, one that seems designed specifically to find the limits of your reflexes and then push past them. The boss fights are their own kind of spectacular, and their own kind of miserable. They're aggressive, they move in patterns that require memorization, and they hit hard enough that a single lapse in concentration can end a run that took you 20 minutes to build. Sin and Punishment is the kind of game that makes you feel like a genius when you're in the zone, and makes you feel completely incompetent the moment you lose focus. There is almost no middle ground. Most American guys our age never got to suffer through this one in real time, but if you've gone back and played it since, you know exactly why it's this high on the list. Number 3. Superman 64, 1999. We need to stop here for a second, because Superman 64 is a unique case. It is not hard in the way that the other games on this list are hard. It is not hard because of demanding level design, or punishing enemy patterns, or precise platforming requirements. Superman 64 is hard because it is broken. Fundamentally, completely, almost impressively broken. The controls are so unresponsive that basic movement feels like filing a formal complaint with the game rather than actually playing it. The ring-flying sections, which make up a significant portion of the early game, require you to navigate Superman through a series of rings in a limited amount of time, using controls that seem to have only a passing relationship with the inputs you're actually giving the controller. The collision detection is a joke. The frame rate drops at moments that seem specifically chosen to ruin whatever you were attempting. The fog, that infamous green fog that obscures half of every outdoor environment, was not an artistic choice. It was a technical limitation that the developers used to hide the fact that the game couldn't render its own environments properly. And yet, beating Superman 64 is genuinely difficult. Not because it challenges your skills, because it challenges your patience, your sanity, and your willingness to keep engaging with something that seems actively hostile to the concept of fun. There are people out there who have beaten Superman 64. They deserve recognition. Not because they're great at video games, but because they demonstrated a level of psychological endurance that most of us simply do not possess. Superman 64 is the worst game on this list. It is also, in its own broken, miserable way, one of the hardest to actually finish, and we stand by putting it at number 3. Drop your disagreements in the comments. We want to hear them. Number 2. Perfect Dark, 2000. Now we're getting into the games that don't just beat you. They make you feel like you never should have picked up a controller in the first place. Perfect Dark was Rare's follow-up to GoldenEye, and in almost every technical sense, it was a better game. Better graphics, better multiplayer, more weapons, more missions, a more ambitious story. If you played it on Agent difficulty or Special Agent difficulty, it was a challenging but fair first-person shooter that rewarded skill and patience. And then there was Perfect Agent. Perfect Agent is the highest difficulty setting in Perfect Dark, and it is a different game. Not a harder version of the same game. A fundamentally different experience that seems designed to test whether you actually want to be there. Enemies on Perfect Agent have near-perfect aim. They react faster. They hit harder, and the missions themselves add extra objectives that aren't present on lower difficulties. Objectives that require you to be in multiple places at once, to protect things while also attacking things, to complete tasks in a specific order, while the game throws everything it has at you. The level design, which is already complex on lower difficulties, becomes a genuine maze on Perfect Dark's hardest setting. You'll know where you're supposed to go. Getting there while keeping yourself alive and completing every objective is another matter entirely. The Carrington Institute defense mission, the airbase espionage, the final stretch of the game on Perfect Agent. These are sequences that broke people. Grown men who had been playing video games their entire lives sat down with Perfect Dark on Perfect Agent and walked away humbled. Perfect Dark is a masterpiece. On Perfect Agent, it is also one of the most demanding experiences the N64 ever produced. And it is number 2 on this list because there is exactly one game we believe is harder. Number 1. Jet Force Gemini, 1999. Here it is, the one. The game that, in our estimation, is the single hardest Nintendo 64 game ever made. And if you've played it, you already knew this was coming. Force Gemini is a third-person shooter developed by Rare, and on the surface, it looks like a game you could love. Great graphics for the era, solid shooting mechanics, a genuinely interesting universe with memorable characters, 3 playable heroes, each with different abilities, a scope and ambition that matched anything else Rare was putting out during their golden era. And for the first several hours, you might actually think it's just a really good game. And then the game shows you what it actually is. To see the true ending of Force Gemini, you have to rescue every single tribesman on every single planet. Every one. These are small, helpless creatures scattered throughout the game's environments, and missing even one locks you out of the conclusion you've been working toward. Not a slightly different ending. The ending. The real one. Here's the problem. The tribesmen are hidden everywhere, behind destructible walls, in areas that require specific character abilities to access, in corners of levels that you would have absolutely no reason to revisit unless you knew they were there. And the game does not tell you how many you've missed or where to find them. It just locks the door and lets you figure out why. The combat is no joke either. Enemy encounters are relentless, and the higher difficulty sections of the game demand precise shooting and smart use of cover in ways that the early hours don't prepare you for. The boss fights are long, demanding, and punishing of mistakes. But it's the tribesman requirement that truly separates Force Gemini from everything else on this list. Because it's not just hard. It's the kind of hard that makes you question your own memory, your own thoroughness, your own willingness to go back through hours of content looking for something you might have missed. We've seen lists that put other games at the top. We've seen arguments for Perfect Dark, for Sin and Punishment, for Castlevania 64. And those are all legitimate conversations worth having. Drop your case in the comments right now. Tell us where we got it wrong. Tell us what should be number one. Tell us what we left off entirely, because we guarantee there are games that belong on this list that somebody out there is furious we didn't include. But Force Gemini is our number one. It is the hardest Nintendo 64 game ever made. It demanded more from players than any other game on the platform, and it did it with a smile on its face, like it was perfectly happy to let you fail. So there it is. 10 games, 10 different ways the N64 tried to break you. From Body Harvest, grinding you down with its sheer unforgiving scope, all the way up to Force Gemini, making you comb through every inch of every level just to see how the story ends. Every single one of these games demanded something from you. Patience, memorization, reflexes, and in some cases, a willingness to suffer that most people just didn't have. And here's the thing, we loved them anyway. We rented them on Friday nights and stayed up until 2 in the morning, trying to get past sections that were designed to stop us. We borrowed them from friends and returned them a week later, having barely made a dent. We talked about them at work, at school, at the lunch table, like they were unsolved mysteries. Because they were. There was no walkthrough to bail you out, no video showing you the exact pattern. It was just you, the controller, and the game. And either you figured it out, or you didn't. Now, we want to hear from you. Do you agree with this list? Is there a game we left off that deserves to be here? Should Perfect Dark be number one? Should Superman 64 be higher, or lower, or in a category all by itself? Is Force Gemini really the hardest, or did we get that completely wrong? Drop it in the comments right now. We read every single one, and this is exactly the kind of debate this community was built for. And if you want more content like this, deep dives into the games that defined a generation, the ones that made us who we are, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. We've got a lot more where this came from. Thanks for watching. Now go touch some grass. You've earned it.